Este panel va a ser moderado por Ken Ducatel, jefe de la unidad DigiConnect de la Comisión Europea. Y confirmamos los panelistas: Víctor Mamama, que es representante de Brasil; Pablo Bello, secretario general de ACIET; Nick Stewart, directora comercial de Escape Cloud Services; Jos Dunfier, director del Centro Interdisciplinario de Derecho y Tecnología de Información; Mamix Decker, experto en seguridad en información de ENCIA; y Michael Tobía, auditor de arquitectura de SAP. Dejo entonces con Ken Ducatel, que moderará este panel. Adelante, Ken.
Okay, thank you very much, Mario, and welcome back. So this is a session which is on the regulatory framework for cloud computing, and we've already touched a little bit on some of these topics in the course of the morning. This is part of the story about establishing robust, transparent, and acceptable, pro-competitive, pro-growth approaches to cloud computing. When we were preparing the European Cloud Computing Strategy, there was a lot of discussion at a political level in Europe about, well, do we need to build new regulations for cloud computing, specific regulations for cloud computing? And general feeling is no. Cloud computing, in a sense, makes many of the traditional concerns, puts them more in the spotlight, it makes them more prominent. But our general opinion in Europe, and the European Commission on this, has been issues like data protection rules, issues like intellectual property rights and so forth, require a future-proofed, cloud-relevant approach, which respect the fact that we're moving to a virtualized economy, which is cross-border, which transcends jurisdictions, where we have to have approaches to the determination of applicable law, and so on. So these are kind of general contextual issues, which are not necessarily cloud-specific, but are part of the digital era. So I think this is a really interesting part of the discussion, and I think we have a strong set of panelists who can talk about what kinds of regulatory approaches we need, and how we deal with some of the challenges in this area in order to get the combination, the sweet spot, if you like, between the challenges of protecting citizens or businesses and promoting innovation, growth, and opportunity. In other words, not tying everything down from the beginning and raising the costs of market entry and so forth. So I'm going to straight away move to Victor Mamana, who is the representative here from Brazil. We've already heard him speak a little bit earlier. Victor, the word is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity, and this is a great opportunity to be here with you. CEPAL is certainly pioneering on this effort, and you can count on us. Okay, so when we talk about regulations, the issue is regulations for what? And I want to go to a very, very high level, and we know that cloud would probably impact the life of citizens. And when we think of this impact, we hope this is going towards human development, right? If you look to the definition of human development for United Nations is a development on culture, economical development, political development, and social development. So in order to achieve that, we need to go beyond the concept of consumer or the concept of a user. Companies take care of customers, government takes care of citizens, right? So that's what we have to be focused on. And that's why we need to deal with the issues related to regulation. If someone compared the cloud computing industry to the air transportation industry. I believe if the air transportation industry at its basis were more concerned about the human rights, I would have more space for me in the planes, right? If you're almost 2 meters tall, you can see the importance of, we know it's very regulated, but some aspects are not in the agenda of the industry, right? So if we're going to build this new industry of cloud computing, it's a good idea to guarantee that the services, although it should be totally free enterprise, the services need to be based on business models that respect the principles, for instance, of the government principles of Internet, just as an example. So what are those principles? Empire of law, democracy, human rights, neutrality, open everything. I'm going to cite Steiner. Empowerment of citizens, right? So that's more than empowerment of consumers, but empowerment of citizens. So those values should be present as a background for all the regulations we need to generate. Brazil is very concerned with that. It's very focused on generating this environment for the good growth of free enterprise on cloud computing. As you know, recently we put this new regulation as a decree. It's a result also of the disclosures of Snowden. It's connected to that. This is not a formal statement of the Brazilian government, but it's the chronology is connected. And the issue is trust, right? Right now, government purchases in Brazil of cloud services and other IT services, there is a specific regulation related to the auditability of the services. How can you audit the security and respect to privacy and respect to the human rights and all this governance principles of Internet, right? So one topic that our countries, and I suggest other countries' representatives that learn, read this new decree of President Dilma. It could be also useful for other countries in this region. And we are also very concerned about generation of local competencies, which also we have some special regulation on that. That's now fully being used by government purchases. And when we talk about methods of auditability, there are several topics that we need to be concerned. Sandboxes, honeypots, honeynets, and all those technologies you use in order to keep your network safe. So that's an important topic for us. It's already in place. It's already being used by government purchases in Brazil. I think Mario mentioned the submarine cable, which is very important also. Brazil had a project on submarine cable before the privatizations. At that time people said, no, it's not important, and the satellite doesn't need to be Brazilian, and things like that. And actually now we see what the price we're paying for those wrong strategic decisions in the decade of 19th. As you know, Brazil has 4 satellites, 2 are only made by Brazil, other 2 with China. And talking about hardware, something that people need to keep in the agenda is IC design, integrated circuit design. There is no network security if you don't have some of the parts of the network, the control of some of the parts of the network. You can expect how do you say that, back orifices, or I don't know the word that's technically used in English. But these devices we are carrying in our pockets, they have very specific characteristics, and detecting these characteristics, and even for the last mile in these networks, having a specific hardware to do cryptography and to do special security measures is very important. And IC design is the only way to achieve that. And so our countries should be careful with that. And Brazil has a very important program on that. Talking about other efforts of Brazil, I want to share with you this cloud solution called Espresso, which is available for all countries. It's a kind of a Gmail with all the features of Gmail, but open and auditable. And it's available for everybody that wants to use it. It was generated by Serpro, which is probably the biggest software company in Latin America. It's a state-owned company, and I think if you need more information, I will be happy to provide you. All this knowledge we are generating, Brazil is now very focused on internet security, cyber security. The Ministries of Science and Technology and Innovation, the Ministry of Planning, and the Minister of Defense, they are working together in order to create a better environment in the cyberspace in Brazil. Sometimes we think about defending our countries with jet fighters and big ships and big carriers, but it's much more effective in terms of security if the external offenses happens through the cyberspace, much cheaper. So having a good cyber defense is very important for all countries in our region. So just to finalize, I believe that the idea of the regulations is to support free enterprise that supports the values of fair competition, democracy, open everything, human rights, neutrality, sovereignty of our countries, social inclusion, universal design. This should be, universal design is design the service from scratch for disabled people, right? So you respect the difference between people. Citizenship, standardization, and also taking advantage of existing solutions that are already being developed by our countries. Okay, so I finish with this contribution.
Okay, thank you very much, Victor. And it's a very large agenda of items which you already put on the table. Ahora quiero dar la palabra a Pablo Bello, que es el secretario general de la Asociación de Latinoamérica de las Empresas de Telecomunicación, que es una organización que está compartido entre los industriales grandes de telecomunicación y también los proveedores de servicios de telecomunicaciones. Pablo.
Muy buenos días y muchas gracias por la invitación. Lo primero que quisiera mencionar es que indudablemente desde la perspectiva de América Latina es muy interesante este espacio que tenemos hoy, esta mañana, porque da cuenta de una segunda generación del debate de las políticas públicas en el ámbito del desarrollo del ecosistema digital. Hasta hace nada veníamos hablando básicamente del cierre de la brecha digital, ¿no?, como un desafío fundamental, y nuestras discusiones de políticas públicas estaban centradas en el desafío de la conectividad. Es indudable que ese desafío no está cerrado, es indudable que no está cerrado, que todavía hay un camino por delante, pero naturalmente la tarea fundamental que tenemos hoy por hoy es cómo somos capaces de utilizar esa conectividad para mejorar las condiciones de vida de nuestros ciudadanos. En el ámbito de la conectividad, que sin duda es una capa esencial para que pueda existir la nube, nosotros hemos realizado un estudio que indica que si queremos alcanzar a los países desarrollados de acá al cierre de la presente década, al año 2020, se requieren 355.000 millones de dólares de inversión en América Latina. Esto es un 10% por encima de lo que tendencialmente se espera que ocurra en estos próximos 8 o 7 años. Por tanto, hay un desafío allí importante. Si bien hay pasos significativos en el sentido correcto del cierre de esa brecha, todavía tenemos bolsones importantes en los cuales la conectividad no es de la calidad adecuada o simplemente no existe. Y para tal efecto se requiere inversión. Y la inversión requiere un conjunto de condiciones que son fundamentales. Pero enfocándonos en el ámbito de del cloud computing, que es lo que nos convoca hoy en día. Básicamente, para no repetir lo que ya se ha dicho anteriormente, la reflexión que yo quisiera plantear tiene que ver un poco con lo que Ken introducía, y es el carácter transfronterizo de las regulaciones y de las políticas para que se pueda desarrollar efectivamente el ecosistema digital, particularmente mirado desde la perspectiva latinoamericana, el ecosistema digital en español, o en español y portugués, ¿no?, que es nuestro entorno compartido. Se mencionaba en la inauguración este concepto del single market, ¿no?, for big data and cloud computing en las declaraciones de la Unión Europea, y yo me atrevo a señalar que el principal desafío que tiene hoy día América Latina en el ámbito del desarrollo digital es la construcción de un single market para el desarrollo de servicios basados en Internet. La soberanía nacional no existe en la nube, o existe para muy pocos en la nube. A lo mejor para Brasil, que tiene un peso específico, un tamaño, tiene ciertas capacidades de establecer regulaciones que establecen modos de operación para los grandes players a nivel mundial en el ámbito de servicios en la nube, tiene cierta capacidad de implementar regulaciones, pero para la gran mayoría de los países latinoamericanos la soberanía nacional simplemente no existe, ¿no? Entonces, allí claramente tenemos un desafío en términos de cómo se plantea un marco ya sea armonizado, que procure regulaciones nacionales que sean convergentes con principios rectores homogéneos, o en su defecto, que creo que yo plantearía como un modelo ideal, aprovechando que tenemos todas las banderas acá de América y de otras zonas del mundo, es que ojalá desde la CEPAL podamos impulsar un esfuerzo para crear una suerte de convenio con rango de tratado a nivel de los países latinoamericanos que permita establecer ciertas regulaciones homogéneas en el ámbito de la nube. ¿A qué se refiere aquello? Indudablemente a todo lo que es la protección de datos personales, a todo lo que es la ciberseguridad, a todo lo que es la privacidad, ¿no? Temas que hoy día están tan en boga a propósito de las noticias que hemos estado viendo durante los últimos meses. Yo creo que más allá de plantear necesarios consensos, que hay que tenerlos en términos de cuáles deben ser las directrices de estas regulaciones, que indudablemente necesariamente pasan por flexibilidad, ¿no? Estamos en un entorno que es cambiante, los modelos de negocios que son inherentes a la nube no están predeterminados, están en evolución. Y hay reflexiones acá que son interesantísimas y que están ocurriendo en diversas partes del mundo, incluyendo América Latina, por ejemplo, los debates sobre net neutrality, ¿no?, de cómo se regula la relación entre los proveedores de redes y los proveedores de contenidos, cuáles son esos vasos comunicantes. Esto nos parece que es un tema fundamental de abordar en un contexto en el cual se requiere infraestructura y se requiere este desarrollo de contenidos, pero toda esa reflexión en términos de regulación y de políticas públicas tiene que ir de la mano de espacios para la flexibilidad en los cuales la innovación y la competencia sea fundamental. Entonces, yo diría que ese debate en sí mismo es fundamental, pero que si no va acompañado de una mirada regional, en el cual, por ejemplo, se puedan establecer obligaciones para que los grandes players de proveedores de servicios en la nube tengan domicilio conocido en la región, no en cada uno de los países, en la región, y que el alcance de la soberanía, por ponerlo en esos términos, pueda ser compartido, me parece que no lograremos darle una solución a los problemas que hoy día están planteados. Siempre cuando nos quedábamos en la reflexión sobre la capa de la infraestructura, ¿no?, decíamos, mira, nuestros tráficos van hacia Estados Unidos. Van hacia Estados Unidos porque allí están los grandes proveedores de servicios. Esta es la misma reflexión. Ya no es el tema del cable de fibra óptica solamente, que lo es, pero ya no es solamente aquel, sino que tiene que ver con las relaciones de los modelos industriales que están detrás y cuáles son efectivamente las oportunidades que tenemos para consolidar en América Latina un modelo de desarrollo que esté basado más en la innovación, en la creatividad y no solamente en la explotación de recursos naturales. Entonces, en ese contexto, establecer la plataforma que nos permita que esos contenidos, que esos servicios, que esas aplicaciones no solamente estén domiciliados en la región, sino que se puedan desarrollar desde la región, ¿no? En el cual pongamos un mayor esfuerzo de incentivos de política pública para incentivar ese tipo de desarrollos, necesariamente creo que tiene que ir de la mano de una mirada regional, ¿no? Y por tanto, mi contribución a esta discusión, en el fondo, es un desafío que creo que es compartido, en el cual la CEPAL, tiendo a pensar que debe tener un rol fundamental, de generar una discusión entre los países para que esa normativa se pueda ir estableciendo por la vía de acuerdos que sean vinculantes y que se traduzcan en regulaciones nacionales a través de algún tipo de tratado. Es indudable que no tendremos respuestas a todas las preguntas hoy por hoy. Hay un conjunto de espacios a nivel global en los cuales se están debatiendo los temas que de alguna manera son subyacentes al desarrollo del cloud computing, a la ciberseguridad, a la privacidad, ya los mencionaba anteriormente. En ese contexto se ha lanzado recién la Global Commission on Internet Governance, se ha lanzado en Davos hace un par de semanas atrás. Yo tengo el privilegio de ser uno de los comisionados de esa comisión y por tanto quisiera poder ser capaz de representar en ese espacio los intereses también de América Latina y en ese contexto para CIET el profundizar estas reflexiones y el trabajar de la mano con CEPAL y con los organismos europeos nos parece fundamental. Para terminar y no ser reiterativo, básicamente lo que quiero señalar es que tenemos un desafío todavía en el ámbito de la conectividad, que si bien va con una buena senda, que debemos acelerar. Es un desafío no solamente económico, es un desafío ético que tiene que ver con la igualdad de oportunidades de los latinoamericanos, el lograr cerrar la brecha digital. Y eso lo podemos hacer de acá al cierre de esta década, sí, pero es un objetivo ambicioso que requiere esfuerzo y requiere un diálogo público-privado de gran envergadura. Y conjuntamente con aquello, el tema es cuáles son las condiciones, hemos mencionado algunas, las condiciones de entorno que permiten desarrollar la economía en la nube, en la región. Y para eso quiero insistir en el concepto que me parece esencial, buscar algún tipo de acuerdo de integración latinoamericana que permita establecer modelos operativos para que las regulaciones sean homogéneas y para que además podamos establecer mecanismos de protección para los ciudadanos latinoamericanos respecto de los contenidos y los servicios que están en la nube. Me parece que esos son los desafíos hoy por hoy, que la confianza, como se ha señalado reiteradamente en esta mañana, es un aspecto esencial, y que la confianza pasa también necesariamente por ciertas regulaciones que permitan proteger la identidad digital de los latinoamericanos, la huella digital, todos los temas que hoy por hoy son nubarrones también que de alguna manera conspiran con el desarrollo del cloud computing. No lo he mencionado, pero también me parece importantísimo en esta reflexión, dado que estamos hablando de servicios nuevamente que carecen de alcance territorial, de soberanía local, el tema impositivo, ¿no? O sea, es una materia que también debemos ser capaces de resolver adecuadamente porque puede ser una barrera muy significativa para el desarrollo de los servicios en la nube en nuestro entorno. O sea, el poder tener una estructura tributaria también armonizada, que no tenga dobles tributaciones o triples tributaciones, nos parece esencial. Donde tampoco se llega al otro extremo, al modelo irlandés, ¿no? donde se establecen modelos en los cuales la tributación termina ocurriendo en buena medida. Pero en fin, son algunas reflexiones que quería plantear desde la mirada latinoamericana, sin duda, y que nos parecen, como se ha señalado reiteradamente esta mañana, de la mayor urgencia. Gracias.
Okay, muchísimas gracias, Pablo. And now I'm going to pass the floor to Nikki Stewart. Nikki is coming from a company which has been very active. It's a small company from the UK, from the United Kingdom, and it's been very active in providing and developing the services for the government, and I think has a very good experience in tackling some of the regulatory challenges around cloud computing. So, Nikki, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ken, and thank you, everybody, to inviting Skyscape to what is a very important forum. So, A little bit about Skyscape before we start talking about regulation. In 2011, the UK government started giving clear signals that it was going to start moving towards cloud, and that was part of its ICT strategy. It had a specific exam question to answer, which was how did it break the oligopoly of the existing suppliers, where, quite frankly, they were paying far too much for the IT they were getting for very mediocre service, and there was little, if any, innovation. So they set some standards, some targets. By 2015, 50% of all new ICT spend was to be in the cloud. There would be a cloud-first policy and a digital-by-default policy. That gave the UK ICT industry, and indeed the global ICT industry, some very clear messages that a market existed, certainly in the UK public sector. So Skyscape was formed in 2011 specifically to address that emerging market. And we've been on a 2-year journey with the UK government, with the UK government buyers, with our industry colleagues towards a really good place where we are now. For Skyscape, we're now employing 50 people. We're still hiring. We have over 50% of the UK government infrastructure market. We'd like to see more players in to generate more competition, because clearly that generates a bigger market for all. You might think in the global context it's a niche market, but we're talking about £17 billion worth of annual spend in the UK public sector alone. So that's quite a big niche, certainly for an SME. What helped us was that the UK government started looking at standards for security very early in the process. So government has its own protective marking scheme. They set a clear common standard across all services. It was called pan-government accreditation, which meant that for a multi-tenant environment such as ourselves, which is a community cloud for government, we could go and get our environment accredited once. It wasn't a non-trivial process. It took time and it cost money, but it accredited us to process data at a certain security level. And that protected us from the legions of local buyers coming and saying, we want you to actually, prove your security standards to us 20, 30, 40 times and possibly make changes, which you can't do when you're running a genuine cloud. And we're not the only supplier who's benefited from that. And actually, the market in the UK now for cloud services is, I would say, going viral. The market is being genuinely disrupted, moving from stagnation to innovation. There are now over 1,000 new entrants into that market who can play, provided they meet a sort of de minimis baseline. New players is a really, really important thing for the UK public sector, as I guess it is more globally. And it is now enabling a very rapid deployment of government policies, such as the digital by default policies, which benefits the citizens as a whole. So, very rapid market evolution, which is good. Spend is increasing rapidly. The benefits are becoming very clear, but there's still an enormous amount of confusion. There are many different flavors of cloud, ranging from the, I guess, totally pay by the hour, totally transactional, through to variations of cloud which look much closer to the more conventional ICT. Many transactional models as well, and many flavors of contracts, ranging from the fully negotiable right through to adhesion contracts. So this means that the UK buyer is on a very steep learning curve, and it means that industry is on that learning curve too. Where do we need to go with this? We need to increase the standardization. We need to improve the guidance around the services that are available, so that buyers of cloud services fully understand the implications of what they are doing when they're stepping into a contract with a cloud provider. Cloud providers equally need to understand the direction of travel for cloud in Europe and on a more global basis. To do that, they need to understand what the standards are going to be. They need to understand how the environment is going to be regulated. It's very clear there is a need for regulation. I think many members of the industry would say that regulation is good, provided you don't over-regulate and you don't regulate innovation and fresh blood out of the emerging market. Why do we need that? Because industry will make an investment when industry understands what the market is going to be and how that market is going to be governed. That's a really important message that I want to get over today. So moving on then, why is the work that the EC is doing so important? So looking at one particular strand of the work that's brigaded under Nelly Cross, the SLA SIG subgroup is looking at, basically a number of aspects of cloud computing which are really important to the buyer to make sure that they're actually getting a cloud service which is going to meet their needs and get it at the right price point and on the right terms. There needs to be a clear and common vocabulary and understanding in all of this. And we're looking at draft outputs for 2014, a draft template service level agreement, augmented with checklists and a toolkit for the buyer, which is basically what aspects of the cloud contract are going to be important to me as a buyer, and how do I navigate through to the right contract. And it's actually quite a complex piece of work. There's broad industry representation on the group. It's a very lively group, many different opinions on that, but it's starting to make progress, and the European Commission have actually commissioned Gartner to put together an initial proposition. They're working that through with the group, and I think the whole group is looking forward to an early deliverable in 2014 that will really make a difference for the consumer of the cloud services, for industry, but actually for the broader cloud market in Europe and globally as well. I think that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Nikki. And neatly following on from what you were just saying about the service level agreements, I'd like to introduce Jos de Mortier. Jos is a professor in the Catholic University of Leuven, which is a very important and a venerable institution just near to Brussels, very famous university, very old university. And Jos is also part of a team that we've recently brought on board to help us develop some of this service level agreement work in order to make sense of these kind of contractual conditions. So Jos, the word is yours.
For this very kind introduction. So I teach and practice ICT law since a very long time. I got my IT education in the early 70s, in the age of mainframes and batch processing and even punch cards. And I remember when we were confronted with the first ICT contracts in the 80s, mainly. The contracts were very much inspired on what happened in the building industry, because we estimated that an IT project had many similarities with the building project. And then in the 90s, we drafted, analyzed, negotiated lots of outsourcing contracts, which was new at that time, because for the first time we were confronted, for instance, with the fact that the data were no longer stored in-house, but sometimes in data centers in other continents. I remember negotiations with companies like IBM, where the security company said this is no longer our core business, we outsource our IT to IBM. So it's not new that data have been stored outside the country and in other continents. At that time, even we didn't have the model clauses that the European Commission later produced in the data protection sector. So it was quite challenging. And also SLAs are very typical for outsourcing contracts. I even nowadays, when we are confronted with cloud computing contracts, I noticed that I still use the same checklist of 15, 20, between 50 and 20 items that in my experience need to be controlled when you draft such a contract or analyze such a contract. They are very much the same in outsourcing contracts and in cloud computing services contracts. The difference is that in cloud computing contracts you are confronted with a standardized offer, and the more you negotiate, of course, the more you get away from cloud computing and you re-enter into the outsourcing scenario. It's a little bit like the difference between buying a pret-a-porter suit instead of a tailored suit. In my experience, many cloud service providers, they present themselves as solution providers. So they say, well, we are willing to negotiate with you about our services offer, but of course there is a price against it. My conclusion is that cloud computing, when you look at it from a legal viewpoint, is not disruptive. It can be, as the representative from Huawei said, it can be seen as something disruptive from the business perspective, of the technological perspective, but from the legal perspective, at least in Europe, we do not consider it as something entirely new. It's more, as I said, the fact that these contracts are standardized. They're very much standardized, and if you want to fully profit of the offer, you have an interest in taking it very much as it is. That's the first point. The second point that I want to emphasize is that I think we should not wait for a regulatory framework or something like that in the area of cloud computing, because this will never happen. Cloud computing is essentially, from a legal point of view, a matter of contract law, and in our jurisdictions, and as far as I know also in Latin America, in most jurisdictions, we don't have a tradition in intervening too much in business-to-business contracts. We have a tradition in protecting consumers and employees because they are the weaker party in a contract. But in business-to-business contracts, we are very reluctant to intervene because the basis of our contract law is contractual freedom. We are reluctant to limit the freedom. We are afraid that it would stifle contractual innovation and inventivity and etc. So there are lots of reasons why we should not do that. So a framework, okay, but more in terms of producing benchmarks, models, codes, best practices, making everything a little bit more transparent, but not a binding regulatory framework. Contrary what you would do, like in the airline industry or in other industries where you protect consumers, or in employment law you protect employees. So that's the second point. Then my third point is that all this doesn't mean that as public authority, regional or national authorities, it doesn't mean that they should refrain from taking action in this field, and mainly in two directions. And there I join what Luc Hendricks has stressed yesterday already, but also today, for not only for small enterprises, but also for larger businesses. In my experience, the problem is a little bit the same as the early adopters, because cloud computing was in the beginning adopted mainly by consumers, Hotmail and Facebook and iTunes and Flickr and Doodle and whatever. So the contractual terms there also are in Facebook 70 pages long, with all kinds of text that are referring to each other, and it's very difficult to make this transparent. I do this exercise every year with our students, but it's very complicated also because the terms change. And nevertheless, millions and millions of people use these services. It's a measured risk. And I also noticed that there is very little litigation in this field, mainly because, and I know I'm referring to my own experience, my Spotify account has been hacked not so long ago, and I was astonished by the service that I got from this company, because they are very much afraid that these kind of incidents get public and would harm their reputation. So in legal terms, we had much more litigation with outsourcing contracts than we had with cloud computing contracts. So making things transparent for businesses, because in cloud computing contracts, they are also confronted very often for the first time with an international business context, and that's problematic for them. So making things more in terms of awareness, providing information, models, best practices, etc. It's one thing. And then the second thing, of course, and that's what I'm very much supporting in what the European Commission is doing, is try to influence the standardized offer. For instance, as a law firm, we are a small enterprise with 15 people, more or less. We offer cloud services. We use cloud services a lot, but we would use it more if there would be a standardized offer for the legal community or for the legal profession. Of course, they will not, this standardized offer, we will not be able to force it alone, but if we can manage to organize this with the legal community worldwide or between Europe and Latin America, it would be a very good thing. And for the same reason, we also support Cloud for Europe as a project, because there also the ambition is of the European Commission and of the people involved. We are responsible for the legal work packages in Cloud for Europe. We see that the legal obstacles, there are very few legal obstacles for doing cloud computing in the public sector, much less than most of the people think. That's perhaps our first conclusion in this project. But of course, the ambition is that in the long run, for the public sector, we can force an influence, a standardized offer, typically for the public sector. And also here, international cooperation between Europe and Latin America, I think it's very much the same. Stimulate the standardized offer from cloud service providers, and by in a way syndicate and working together. That's one of the main things at this stage that can be done. So thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thanks very much, Jos. And I think it's very useful we had this discussion on contract law and making the distinction between the negotiated contracts and the standardized take it or leave it contracts, because they do seem to have different ways of manifesting themselves, but also making the difference between enterprise-related regulatory approaches, so business-to-business commercial law, and consumer protection law, which in the European legal base, the consumer protection law would also cover small firms. So it was with the same set of regulations. And I think one of the things I'd like to come back to is whether or not there would be a scope for standardized ways of addressing the services which are offered to that particular group, to the small firms, the very small firms, and the private individuals who don't have any scope really to negotiate the terms of the service which they're receiving. So moving on then to Marnix Dekker. So Marnix is working in the European Network and Information Security Agency, which is an agency of the European Commission, which actually depends upon our Directorate General and our Commissioner. Agencies have a somewhat arm's length relationship with the European Commission, so they are independent, although we do tend to be advising them on their work program, and but they're in the end their work program is determined by the steering board that they have, which is composed of industry and member states. So they're somewhat independent, but they're doing work for European Union overall. Marnix has been very heavily involved in our work following up the cloud computing strategy, and he's, I think, one of the pillars of the discussion around security in cloud. very much like to hear what you have to say on the topic of security and certification in cloud.
Thanks a lot, Ken, for the nice introduction. Thanks for inviting ENISA to this forum. It's very interesting. I mean, we are also looking at South America as a very interesting partner for obvious reasons. I mean, I think we all spoke years ago about the open source and open standard push of Brazil, and that was really, really well appreciated in Europe, at least among the nerds and the tech guys like me. So I would just like to bring the security perspective to the table here. I did this also yesterday. So, what usually happens when you invite a security expert to speak about new technologies, usually you get a very long list of concerns and risks and problems. And in fact, when you read surveys and papers about cloud computing, a lot of the time security is seen as a barrier, something that prevents adoption, and it's a problem we have to solve. Government has to intervene, or we have to do something about it. Actually, since 2009, ENISA has been writing about cloud computing, and we actually took a quite different approach. I mean, we really see cloud computing as an opportunity to improve security. And so I will just very briefly give you our perspective on this. So what we're seeing is that CIOs of enterprises and CIOs of countries and IT officers in cities and organizations, that they're faced with a dilemma. On the one hand, they need to introduce more and more information technology. There's more and more dependence on this kind of technology. And the other side, you keep reading in the news about cyber attacks. Attack pressure is really rising. A lot of criminals are going online now. The bank robberies are moving online. And you see very, very powerful organizations bringing to bear their attack capabilities. And if you just forget for a second about all the NSA revelations and Snowden affair, which kind of shows that if you have endless resources and a very large organization, you can break anything. If you forget about this, if you remember, most attacks are actually being carried out with very simple, off-the-shelf tools that cost no money. I mean, people just invent themselves cyber criminals. They download 2 or 3 tools from the net, and then they can start making money. So what is very important to remember is that we're not very good at deploying secure systems. Deploying secure systems is very hard and very expensive. So, when a CIO is faced with a difficult problem that is hard and expensive, usually he looks around to other people that are in the same situation, and he tries to partner and to share the costs. And when I see in the Netherlands, for example, Dutch cities are autonomous. They can set up their own websites, their own services with the citizens, and that's all very nice. But of course, many of these systems, they have very similar platforms, very similar internet sites where you can say, I have just put my old couch outside the door, please come and pick it up. I would like to have a new passport, please arrange a date for me. So when I see these Dutch cities partnering and start sharing platforms, start sharing content management systems, I see a lot of security opportunities, because I see that they are moving towards a more centralized and a more efficient way of delivering security. And these people can get state-of-the-art security measures without bearing the full cost of these things. So one important thing that I also stressed yesterday, I mean, in the public debate and in newspapers and journalists and sometimes also politicians, the word cloud is kind of seen as one big blob. When you go cloud, you mean, I don't know where my data is. I'm going to run my apps in the United States. This kind of connotation. But cloud also can happen at much smaller scales, right? So you can really find partners that have similar needs to you and work with them and create a small cloud, a community cloud, which already gives you a lot of economies of scale. Just think about 24/7 monitoring of your systems, or even 1 or 2 security experts that are able to understand problems and mitigate attacks. One very, very good example of where security can be a driver for the uptake of cloud computing is when you go to Japan. So they had not very long ago a very devastating earthquake, and actually during the earthquake, so during the disaster, the most traditional IT deployments started failing. There was not enough power. Diesel generators didn't get the fuel. The data centers, the big data centers, actually kept up running, and even the data links over 3G meant that these services could be accessible. Right after, in the response phase to the disaster, the Japanese government heavily relied on cloud computing, and notoriously a number of big cloud providers started offering their services for free to help locate victims, to help distribute food, and that was really a clear case of how cloud can be used to, in these cases of natural disasters. At that moment, by the way, there was, some famous remarks from Japanese government where they said, well, we're going to prioritize fuel for data centers because, we don't like that people are freezing to death because they don't have heating. But if we don't have fuel for the data centers, we don't know where they are freezing to death. So we can't even go and help them. So now, some years down the road, they are actively pushing all their companies into the cloud. They're saying, look, we want to be able to resist stronger earthquakes, so we would like you to move to the cloud. They have an active cloud adoption program, and the motivation is really security and resilience. They, by the way, also have a priority program for fueling these data centers. If you look at Italy, for example, there's now a law that obliges government organizations to basically have not only their data backed up in a remote site, but they actually are obliged to have operations up and running within a day. And if you think about how do you make sure that your operations are up and running after a day in case of a big disaster, well, you're effectively looking at cloud computing. You're looking at failover sites and so on. So, big security drivers, 24/7 monitoring, secure software development, which is very expensive, security experts, which are hard and expensive. And, generally, we try to push this message as a security as a driver. Now, of course, it's not without a risk. There are, as Jos also mentioned, there are a lot of issues related to governance, control, the usual outsourcing problems. So we try to help customers with making a good due diligence. And as part of this work, we were also, very happy when the European Commission issued their cloud strategy. So not only because it's not our job to think about jobs and innovation, but we do think further uptake of cloud computing can improve security. I'm just going to go into detail very briefly about some work we're doing for the European Commission on cloud certification. So the European Commission set up a group of different industry players and industry associations that were supposed to work on this action that was mentioned in the cloud strategy about how to support the use of certification schemes. Some objectives that we came up with together with this group was that we really wanted to show customers which certification schemes are out there and allow them or make it easier for them to start using certification if they want. A very important requirement there is that we don't want certification to become some kind of an obligation. We really think that things like self-attestation are important mechanisms for smaller companies and startups. And what we came up with is two products basically. One is a website that lists different certification schemes and explains who runs them, who audits these certifications, basically how they work, what is the underlying standard, and so on. And this is really a way to make customers find the right information through the marketing material of some of these schemes. So very important to note that we're not going to point at a specific scheme. So we're not going to say, you have to be ISO certified, or you have to have the Cloud Security Alliance certification scheme or the Eurocloud certification scheme. We're going to take a neutral approach here because that's what most member states and government organizations want to do. Another work that we just started, and that's still very much to be determined, but we also want to give certain customers who have more detailed security requirements and more expertise on security a way to understand better which of their security requirements are covered by which certification schemes. So basically we're looking at a mapping, and we call this a meta framework.
Okay, thank you very much. So our last speaker for this session is Michael Tobian, who's coming from SAP. SAP is the largest software company based in Europe, but actually a large part of its business is global. I think the majority of its business is now global. It's a very strong player in the United States, but also in other markets, such as the Asian markets and so forth. It's a company which has been very heavily committed to and engaged in our European cloud work. Indeed, its joint chief executive, Jim Hagemann-Snabe, is one of the members of the European Cloud Partnership Steering Board, and he's been extremely active in this area. I think it's particularly interesting to have Michael here today, because he's one of the people who's been working on this concept of a gold standard, if you like, in the area of security and data protection. With that, I'd like to give the floor to Michael.
Thank you very much. Yes, actually, I'm involved in several initiatives. I'm involved in the SAP gold standard, so to say. The second is I'm involved in ISO 27018, which is a cloud data protection standard. And I'm also involved in, I'm committed to the code of conduct. And I'm absolutely committed to information security, because this is actually my basis where I come from. So you know all the difference between being involved and being committed. If you're about breakfast, you want to have ham and eggs. Yes, the chicken is involved, the pig is committed. Yes. So, let me give you a short background on the code of conduct and the current status. The code of conduct is majorly a work by cloud providers, not only in Europe but globally, and some plenary users that drive certification schemes like Eurocloud, for example, or also some other members from like telecommunication enterprises. And we have EU experts, especially from France, and the Article 29 work group, which is, of course, the dispositive of the complete gold standard of the and of the code of conduct. Yes. Why is it? Why do we have the feeling that we need some sort of a European code of conduct? There are, of course, the certain obstacles for the adoption of cloud computing. And one of the major obstacles is that we have 28 diverse regulatory schemes in the EU, which makes you. I can probably later on give you a short impression on how frustrating this sometimes may be. Yes, but this is really a very hard topic. The next is that, of course, public perception of end-user clouds is pretty bad, and this is why I want to introduce here a new distinction between end-user cloud like Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and so on, and some sort of business cloud, yes, which must be, of course, completely different, and not only because of the business case that they are opening. I think this is obvious. SAP is a player only in the business cloud. We don't have any end-user clouds. We are not driving any Facebook alikes or something like that. Okay. Especially in Germany, we have another obstacle, which is the 2009, the right to audit a sub-processor. A processor has turned into the duty, into an obligation. Yes, this was always valid for the public sector, but now also customers have to assess the security of a cloud provider. And if we look into the small and medium enterprises, we see that they are completely overburdened with this duty. So they step away and say, no, we cannot go into the cloud because I don't even know how to audit you, how to assess you. And so now what is helping are, of course, a lot of certification schemes, but it's still, in a legal speech, so to say, it's still unsure, it's still uncertain whether relying on a certification is assessment enough for them. So they still have the feeling that they have to go through the data center. You all know the word data center tourism, yes? Next job will be selling Coca-Cola in front of our data center. And this problem really leads to some sort of a denial of service attack on the data center level, because you have all those people running through the data center. Yes, and if you have the mandated data protection area, all those measures that are demanded by data protection, technical and organizational measures, at some level have to drill down into technical measures. Yes, you have to provide evidence, and we all have to listen to. We have to build trust. This is major, the number one point here, and building trust means surely provide evidence. Yes, there is no trust without evidence. Yes, and evidence brings transparency, brings consent, and so on. So, what is the purpose of the code of conduct? Is it shall fairly represent the measures, the technical and organizational measures of a cloud service provider. This is in terms of data protection, information security, of course. But it shall not be a replacement for legal or contractual obligation. And here now is exactly the point. If we have a code of conduct, it is essential not to have yet another standard. Yes, yet another standard. It is essential that we get some small halo, some release by the Article 29 working group, that we have the sort of halo in terms of, yes, if you don't audit your cloud provider yourself, but if you rely on the certification scheme built up in terms of code of conduct, then we are fine. Then you have proper due diligence. Yes, I think this is the key turning point. Everything needs to focus on this. Okay. Of course, it shall provide confidence, like it does for the airplanes we have heard, or I prefer the train analogy. Yes, going by train, they are specialized in public transportation, and they are the safest way to travel. So we all trust them, and so we should build a cloud certification scheme which is which in the long run builds a similar trust for everyone. Okay. As I already talked about, that it shall replace customer individual audits. Yes, because customer individual audits are simply a denial of service, and it shall not be some sort of assurance for the cloud provider himself that he does everything right. Yes, he is still liable. He shall still keep liable for what he actually provides, and it's not a substitute for management of internal controls. Yes, so they still need these controls. The scope of the code of conduct is, of course, cloud providers, cloud service providers who deal with PII, personally identifiable information. But actually, if you have all the technical and organizational measures in place to have to assure a proper processing of PII, then you probably also foster the trust for other information like intellectual property. What we are facing with the current situation of the data protection regulation in Germany is the penalties are pretty low, yes. So the risk of being sued for data protection issues is very small. Yes, but the companies still are afraid to come into the cloud, not because of, they can violate data protection laws. They are afraid to lose their intellectual property because they heavily depend on their intellectual property. So this code of conduct can also be the source of truth for providing evidence that shows that information security, no matter what kind of data, information security is done the right way. Yes. Okay, and the code of conduct shall also be very open. I look to Mr. Steiner, and it shall be very open. Open means the certification regime shall be very open to other. It shall not be a market differentiator in the certification market. Yes, you all know the frontiers between the German BSI and the British BSI and the American CSA and so on. They all want to get their turf because that's their business case. And cloud customers shall have the freedom of choice. No, cloud service provider shall have the freedom of choice, and it also shall provide the possibility for standards like Eurocloud or something like that to map to the control objectives of the code of conduct. The code of conduct does not come with specific controls which are broken down to a certain level of detail. It comes with only with control objectives, which does not mandate the controls. We had the discussion in advance. If you have the crocodiles around your, if you think crocodiles around your data center are appropriate, it may be. It's up to you. Yes, but you have to protect your data center. Okay. I received a sign that my 5 minutes are over. I think this is so far about the standard, and I'm expecting questions and hot discussions about standardization of, legal topics. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. We haven't got so much time for debate because being British but living in Belgium for a long time, of course, the timing of meals is very important. So I'll try and keep us not running over too much, even though the coffee break went on a bit longer than it was supposed to, and the previous session was a bit late. But I would like to give about 10-15 minutes for some discussion. I found the discussion, the presentation is very rich, and one of the things that struck me listening to it is what a large range of regulatory issues are touched by this. So things like human rights, accessibility, of course, data protection, but security in all of its very many manifestations. Law enforcement access was broached, and how we govern this. And that's become a very, very topical thing, not just from the point of view of government access in general, or the due process for law officers trying to track down criminals, or tax people trying to spot tax evaders, but also for security services who, generally speaking, have different regimes for getting access to data. Industrial policy and the issues relating to ability to establish in different geographies, and related to that, of course, competition rules. And then issues relating to procurement, and issues related to sectoral businesses. And actually one of the things that we've been trying to not delve too much into is all the different sectoral rules that you have in the health sector, in the financial sector, in the legal sector, and so on and so forth, which actually make life very, very complicated, because these are often very different from one place to another. And compliance with these rules often makes it quite difficult to establish cloud services. So clearly it's a very large agenda. And one of the things that people were saying in the presentations is, maybe we can deal with this through, we might call them voluntary arrangements. So some of the players, quite a lot of the players in this business are international. And they have a big interest, a motivation to try to solve some of these problems by doing things like signing up to codes of conduct, by cleaning up their act. But this begs a question: do we really believe that the industry itself will play the game? Will they put their house in order and organize themselves in such a way that actually we can have lighter regulatory approaches? And I'd like to ask the speakers whether or not they have any reaction to this. I mean, do we have any evidence that actually the industry is cleaning up its act, or would we need to have some kind of regulatory engagement? So I throw it open. Jos mentioned it. Maybe I can start the discussion with you. I mean, you said, okay, maybe we shouldn't go for binding frameworks. Maybe we should go for these kinds of maybe co-regulatory agendas or codes of conduct and so on. So do we believe that these things will really work? Can we trust them?
Yeah, my answer is that they will do it if they have an interest in doing it. So what you can do is try to have sufficient mass on the demand side, like we are doing in the public sector. So try to have a kind of syndicate of on the demand side that is strong enough to influence the offer. But I don't believe that you can achieve this by regulation or by codes of conduct as such. And the code of conduct can help as a benchmark, and they can help, for instance, the public sector in drafting their collective cahier de charge, if you wish. The same for the legal community, the legal profession, or the medical profession. So I very much believe in influencing the standardized offer, which is typical for cloud computing, by strengthening the demand side. That's basically my answer.
Okay, who else wants to jump in? We'll come to Pietro in a minute because you're not in the panel for the moment. Victor.
Well, I don't know. The experience of Brazil is very different from Europe. If you look to the media in Brazil, which is very little regulated, and the way it's working, my Brazilian colleagues may testimony that we have a lot of problems related to several aspects of the services they provide to the Brazilian society. And it's not a matter of trusting or not the players. It's just we need to be very careful, especially in this kind of business. If you look for, you mentioned the social networks, which are also cloud computing, in a sense. It's basically transforming. It's a free service that you provide to the citizen, right? And it's basically transforming the citizen into a product, right? So every time you have a free service, the product is you, right? That's a rule. So the way it's being done is also very dangerous in a way for the rights of the citizens. And so I personally think it's a very difficult issue. I'm not want to make any formal statement on behalf of the Brazilian government. I'm not allowed to do that. But we need to be very careful regarding this topic.
So on the panel, I had some offers to talk from off the panel. Nikki.
So just coming back to your question, would you believe that suppliers would adhere simply to a code of conduct or to something that's relatively high level and lightweight? As a supplier, my experience of buyers is that they simply would not believe that, and I would be very concerned actually if we were to rely solely on that, because as a cloud provider, what I can't afford to have is all my resources tied up into helping buyers fulfill their due diligence. That's not what we're about. We're about automized standard service, very lean on people. So the people engagement is high cost to us, and that cost would have to go back to cost of service, so it becomes counterproductive. So what we would want to see are common standards which suppliers could aspire to and gain. And even then, I would say that buyers are still suspicious and will attempt to not overturn them, but again perform due diligence. And when you're running a genuine multi-tenant cloud service, you simply cannot get into that game. So we have to find a way of keeping it relatively simple, relatively straightforward. But every aspect of this, through from standards like ISO 27001, through from the UK government, pan-government security standards, through to standard terms and conditions, I have had buyers try to overturn and vary every single aspect of that. And there's a huge thing around behaviour and education here, so that underpins this too.
Just can I ask you a question? So do you think then there is scope for embedding this in some kind of regulatory mechanism, or do you think I mean, in a sense there's kind of, well, you could say all cloud services, in order to get a license to operate on a territory, would have to comply with this if it meets a certain risk level, or you could say actually, as the UK government has been doing, actually in order to comply with a certain risk level for procurement, you have to have this badge. So would you go for the more maximalist position, or are you relatively happy with just the procurement side of things?
I guess from my own organisation's perspective, we're probably relatively happy with just the procurement side of things, because when you get into maximalist regulation, it becomes very unwieldy. Particularly if we start looking at this across continents, we would be concerned that an aspect of regulation which would come in, which would prevent us playing in certain markets. So I think it's more about if a supplier has 27001 or ISO 27018, that means X, and it's getting those standards common across the various markets, so that buyers have a clear understanding. From my perspective, that would work.
Pietro and Luke wanted to speak, but please, because we're short of time, and I want to ask another question before we stop.
Thank you. Just coming back to your question about, do you believe the industry would be interested to follow certain standards or certifications? The answer is yes, but I think the challenge is harmonization. There are too many different standards out there, which makes it very, very difficult for the industry to, decide on which standards or certification or code of conduct recommendations to follow. I think harmonization is one key to enable the industry to focus on certain things, as well as for the buyers to understand, what kind of standards would make sense for their business. At the moment, I think it's too many different things. Reduction, standardization of the standards, harmonization would certainly help.
Okay, but you kind of make a nice segue into my second question. Of course, I understand you're also from Europe, so we have this pooling of sovereignty. So I'm going to come to this issue about, how we pool sovereignty in this area, in inverted commas. But I'll let Luc speak first.
On your question, Ken, I would say I hope so. But as Mr. Dumorty has said, it will depend on the pressure from the demand side. And he said also that normally public authorities do not intervene in the B2B relations. This was maybe true in the past. when B was equal to B. But here in this case, B is not equal to B, and especially towards small and medium-sized enterprises, they have no negotiation power. And by the way, the public authorities and the European Commission intervened, for example, in B2B concerning the late payment. This was also in the beginning the argument of freedom of contract. There is no freedom of contract if you are not on an equal basis. And I think that, for example, in cases such as lost data, that at least there should be a compensation. But if this can be achieved on a voluntary way, from enterprise perspective, this would, of course, be better.
So this issue of asymmetry of power, I think, is really important and needs a bit further exploration. And certainly that's one of the things that the European Commission is doing in respect of contracts with the expert group that our colleagues in DG Justice and partner Directorate General is running, in which you're also a member of, which is actually looking specifically into this issue of should we actually define some model terms or standardized ways of defining cloud contracts. And it's very complex work because cloud is very different from one service to another service, from whether you're in the infrastructure as a service or software as a service or whatever, and so on. So it's a very complex business. I see Pablo wants to take the floor, but I'm going to move towards my last question because time is pressing. And this concerns what I think is core for us here. So we all have our regulatory frameworks. We have our regulatory frameworks in Europe, and we have, as Pablo rightly said, we have this single market, which is really one of the most important mechanisms that the European Commission has to make proposals for regulatory change, because we have instruments which operate at the level of member states' law being harmonized by implementation of the same set of rules, but in a local law. And we also have European level laws which are directly implemented through what we call a regulation. So, and the European Commission is very frequently, when it makes legal proposals, using this instrument of the Single Market Act in order to so do, which is sometimes controversial with member states, because member states sometimes find this infringing on their own right to act. So this issue of to what extent common rules are actually infringement of sovereignty, and how do you work your way through it? So that brings me to the question, which is, okay, we have a global system of the internet. We have a global system of emerging cloud providers and people trying to run businesses inside of this global system, probably in local economies. We have citizens who are using these services, whose recourse, whose protection is actually provided by national governments. So if we want a balance between policies which are pro-growth and at the same time protection for citizens and for businesses in the local economy, how do we balance this? How do we make a start on what Pablo, I think, was harmonization? What's the starting point for this? Is it necessary to imagine common building blocks, or would we already have to start thinking, well, in the end we would need some international agreements for some of these things? So Pablo, you volunteered to start this part of things because you already wanted to take the floor, but I think some of the other speakers might want to give us some thought. And I think this is helpful for our future work, because this is really going to the core of some of the questions we will have to address. To what extent can we solve this difference of our regulatory frameworks? Because this is really the fundamental.
A ver, lo primero que quería mencionar, lo decía Víctor, es que la realidad en América Latina no es la misma realidad que hay en la Unión Europea, ¿no? Eso es innegable y por tanto nosotros en América Latina todavía tenemos un desafío de construcción de ciertas normas básicas de armonización que en el caso europeo ya están resueltas. La experiencia en América Latina todavía en el ámbito de los países, por ejemplo, asociado al desarrollo del comercio electrónico, va muy de la mano de aquellas cosas que estamos planteando ahora. Hace 10 años atrás se hablaba de cómo desarrollar el comercio electrónico y ahí básicamente lo que se planteaba como necesidad era un mix de regulación para poder generar condiciones de confianza, desarrollar medios de pago, establecer un ecosistema que permitiera el desarrollo del comercio electrónico, pero también se requería mucho liderazgo y mucha iniciativa público-privada. Yo creo que estamos en una situación equivalente, con la complejidad adicional que efectivamente las fronteras son mucho más porosas, por decirlo de alguna manera. Por tanto, yo sí que creo firmemente que en primer lugar, dada los diferentes niveles de partida, que América Latina tiene que hacer un esfuerzo de construcción de un marco que promueva ese mercado único o que avance ese mercado único, pero sin desmedro de aquello. Sí que necesariamente este será un tema que tendrá que caer en la OMC o en algún organismo multilateral en el cual se empieza a discutir efectivamente cómo se resuelven las relaciones de los servicios en la nube, porque efectivamente, más allá de los asuntos asociados a la protección de datos, a la privacidad, a la libertad asociada inherente a Internet, hay complejidades comerciales meramente que tienen que resolverse en forma adecuada y que el ordenamiento actual creemos que es insuficiente para hacerlo. Insisto en el tema tributario que me parece que es fundamental y que claramente no está resuelto en América Latina.
Okay, thank you very much, Pablo. Who else wants to give us some ideas on this? And I think Victor, I know you're not going to be able to take the position of Brazil. We don't expect this is an open exchange on the kind of general problematic, right? Everyone understands this.
I have to say something now, right? I'm scared how bald I'm getting when I look to the screen. Just kidding. Okay. It's when we think about Latin America and we say it's very different from Europe, actually Europe is very regulated, much more than us, right? So we need to be a little bit more in that direction, I guess. Not too much. I'm not defending very, full of tights and something that's not dynamic. We need flexibility, dynamism. But it's actually very different how the market is regulated here and there in sense of this standardizations, and we have a lot to learn with Germany especially. And actually I want to transform this into a very quick question because I would like to understand a little bit about this auditing you mentioned. That happens in Germany. How is this? Because you said the companies that use the cloud services, they need to audit the cloud providers, right? So it would be very useful for us to learn a little bit about how that happens and what's that.
Okay, so that was an interesting way of taking the chairing of the meeting over.
I cannot make a question, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's also something Nikki referred to, which is the problem that actually what you need to have is a recognition or an acceptance of audit certificates from third parties, because you can't have everyone crawling over your data center. It's insecure and it's inefficient. And I'm taking the parole away from Michael in order to bring it to an end, this discussion. So, one of the issues there is that actually very often the local laws require a physical audit. And in the cloud, this is increasingly difficult to actually do and doesn't make any sense given the way in which the architecture of cloud is working. And this becomes, for some organizations, a showstopper. They can't buy cloud because their rules prevent this. And actually, this is one of the rules we have in the European Commission about using of cloud. Actually, we require for certain types of data that we would have to do have the opportunity to do a physical audit and inspection on site. And this becomes part of the challenge space in terms of making practical steps towards adopting the technology in a way that works. And that's why certification schemes actually turn out to be quite important, because a third party might be able to do it for a whole group of clients. Do you have anything to add to that, Michael? And
well, besides that you will just that auditors only will see blinking lights in the data center, and which has nothing to do with IT security, yes, but they have the right to see it, yes. So we always have to clean the servers and so on. So, and besides that, I'm not amused, or I'm not mad about the regulation, the size or the amount of regulations that we have in Europe. I'm concerned about the diversity. Yes, the 28 member states plus Switzerland plus Norway, and even plus the US. Yes, we have to deal with the US via safe harbor and so on. So this is always brings some enormous efforts into it. And don't start to, if I could give you a future advice for Latin America, follow the harmonized approach. Yes, it can be as strict as it wants, as long as it is only one approach.
Yeah. Okay, listen. I'm not going to give the floor back to the speakers because this would introduce a new delay. I want to thank you all for your comments. I think it was a very rich set of issues which were raised. And, okay, we're just at the start of this process, so I think it's very good that we have lots of ideas on the table and lots of problems in terms of figuring out how to go forward. I think Marnik's made a very good point, which is let's look at it in an optimistic and constructive way rather than just looking at the problems. Let's start looking at solutions, and let's break the problem down into, or the challenge down into a number of things we can tackle and start making some progress on. And I think that will allow us to make steps forward without being defeated by the immensity of the challenge that we face. So I hand the word back to Mario, and I suppose you're going to tell us something about the next steps.
Muchas gracias. Panel muy interesante, mucha discusión. Bueno, ahora dentro del programa tenemos un almuerzo que está programado, y la cual están invitados todos los expositores y también los invitados al seminario. El almuerzo va a ser en el cuarto piso, por la escalera del hall que tenemos acá a la salida. En el cuarto piso va a haber almuerzo para todos, y con la idea de que estemos de vuelta a las 2:30 para poder cumplir nuestro programa y tener los paneles siguientes y luego la clausura. Así que, bueno, muchas gracias y los esperamos entonces que nos puedan acompañar en el almuerzo.